my name is Audrey Scritsfield.
Hi, my name is Isles Critchfield.
Will you help a child in need?
Hey listeners, my girls and I would like to invite you to join us this holiday season in supporting a nonprofit we care very deeply about. It's called the Homeless Children's Playtime Project. If you visit wishlist.playtimeproject.org, you'll see an Amazon wish list for gifts that are requested to help a DC homeless child have a happier holiday. Again, it's wishlist.playtimeproject.org. Happy holidays!
If you think it's time to take a hammer to your bathroom scale and rip up the diet rulebook, well, welcome to Body Kindness. Hi, everyone. It's Rebecca Scritchfield, author of Body Kindness and host for this podcast. I'm a health at every size dietitian, a certified exercise physiologist, a former chronic dieter, and mom to 2 girls. Join me as I talk to guests about what it means to be good to ourselves and create a better life where well-being matters, not weight. Through these conversations, we'll reveal the challenging and surprising ways our culture keeps us searching for our worth in our appearance. So let's create a new view of health that's inclusive and built on compassion and respect for all bodies. Let's shake things up and let's change the game.
And they find that when people are primed with thoughts about mortality, they behave differently. And they act in ways that either they can be harsh to other people, they can scapegoat other groups of people, they can cling more closely to their own cultural traditions or religious beliefs or symbolic objects that are important to those beliefs. And it seemed to me while I was reading about all of this research and reading Ernest Becker's writings that diet culture could very clearly be connected to this kind of behavior.
That was Michelle Alison, also known online as the Fat Nutritionist. Check her out at fatnutritionist.com and on Twitter at Fat Nutritionist. She is a registered dietitian with the College of Dietitians of Ontario, and she has an accredited degree in nutrition from Ryerson University. She works online to help people stop dieting, deal with picky eating, and relearn normal eating. She's a member of Dietitians of Canada and the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health. And guys, this is my 100th episode. So do a little clap, jump up and down. Hooray, hooray. I'm so excited to accomplish that milestone. Thank you so much for being here, listening, subscribing, and sharing. And please keep doing that. Please keep supporting the show. It means a lot. Shoot me an email if you have any ideas for topics, Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com. You are in for a real treat. Michelle has been a major influencer in how I look at a harm of diet culture and why it's so hard to resist and how it stays so strong outside of appearance, which I tend to talk about the most, but even how it intersects with our fear of death. So she introduces me to the psychological theories behind this and the reading and research that she has done and how that has influenced her writing and her work. So you are going to get something useful out of this just by opening up your eyes to the idea that, you know, as you begin to question, like, why am I spending my time on this and why do I do these things, that there are many powerful factors at play. And it's not just, you know, what we commonly talk about, which is like, because we got to look amazing for the beach. I actually wish I would have had access to her information when I was writing Body Kindness, because I am 100% confident that I would have talked to her and referenced her and brought her into the loop. So her writing is great. Her blog is great. I hope you'll check all that out. I hope you get something helpful out of the conversation. We kick it off with some dialogue back and forth about our own experiences in discovering health at every size, where we were at in our dietetics field and whatnot. So shout out to the fellow RDs or other helping pros who are working really hard to evolve and disentangle themselves from diet culture. Hopefully you'll find that part helpful. And if you're just looking for some help on your body kindness journey, you know, as we discuss that first, I think it would be helpful to see how helping professionals kind of examine and come to take this approach. But also, it's really not different than from how you might be kind of at the beginning and thinking about, is this right for me? And how do I know? And what do I do? And then we get into the nitty gritty about dieting and death anxiety. And we talk about Goop and Gwyneth Paltrow. And I've got lots of great links in the show notes. So be sure to check those out. And even an old podcast guest and good friend of mine, Alan Vidovitz, comes up in the conversation. So you'll definitely want to check out our interview if you have not listened to it yet. It is about the religion of diet culture. Enjoy the show. Books make great gifts, and I would love to help you give the gift of body kindness this holiday season. Visit bodykindnessbook.com/order, and you can order one or save some money when you order 6 or more copies. Again, that's bodykindnessbook.com/order. The price includes shipping in the United States, and I'm happy to customize those orders. Also, don't forget, Body Kindness will be available on audiobook starting December 25th, 2018. You can order it now with your Audible credit for this month, or you can do an Audible trial and you'll actually be able to order it and get it free. So you can learn more at Audible by just searching for the term body kindness, and you'll find the page right there. Go ahead and pre-order. And then don't forget to visit bodykindnessbook.com/presale. When you submit your proof of purchase, you will get some free goodies as a thank you from me where you can't get anywhere else. Happy holidays. Hey, Michelle, welcome to Body Kindness.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. It blends my two favorite things, diet culture and dying and death.
I love that. That's one of your favorite things. That's great.
Well, you know, and once in a while I'll post something about being death positive. And I think people think I finally crossed a line. Like, okay, we get fat positive, we get body positive. What is death positive?
Yeah.
But it's true. I mean, it's this idea of thinking about of how we even approach the idea of death and dying, which is a normal part of life. I think is fascinating. So I'm really, really excited to delve into this conversation with you. But I wanted to start with letting listeners know how I came to know you. And it has to do with an amazing piece that you wrote that literally, so it came out in February 2017, but every time I speak, I cannot get rid of the slide that shows your article because it's so amazing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no,
Wow.
I mean, you were like everywhere in the United States. If I'm talking, this article is up there on the slide.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's that great. But it was in The Atlantic, which is a great publication. And the headline's Eating Toward Immortality. Diet culture is just another way of dealing with the fear of death. I also love the accompanying image, which I will include the link to this wonderful article in the show notes anyway. The image is like the classic, like it could be an Instagram post of all the quote, you know, healthy lifestyle influencers, because it's like a bowl of vegetables and like a green juice coming out of like one mystery container to another container.
You got to have that green. There's something about the color of that green, whether it's on avocado toast or in a green smoothie. There's something very highly symbolic about it, I think, right now. Yeah. It's having a moment.
Yes.
And yes.
Well,
and
green is life.
I love that it shows that image. Yes. Yes. And I also noticed, like, back in the days when I worked retail, when I was, you know, still a kid, basically, and I worked in a bookstore, that all of the like health and wellness titles, they would be green and white. There was a very specific like coding.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was like, there's something going on here. There's some stuff happening.
That's so funny. I have to add this. I was just randomly this last weekend, my husband and I decided, we didn't even decide. He poured the coffee, I poured the coffee, and it started with the hall closet. Next thing you know, it was like 9 p.m. and we had spent all day just going through stuff and finding stuff to like keep, toss, or donate. And one of the things was this, I don't know how to explain. It's like a file folder, but like on wheels, so you can wheel it to your different offices or whatever. So like way back in the day, in the very beginning of becoming a dietitian, I was like subleasing in a couple different places in DC. So I literally like carry around this luggage with me of like, you know, all my handouts of what to eat and my plate that was labeled and like
all the dietitian stuff. Yes.
All the dietitian tools and my business cards for my company called Elite Nutrition. And it's funny, on the back of this quote was like, nothing changes until you do. And
attributed to unknown. And my company colors were green and white.
Oh, that's amazing.
And like a little blue and gold. So like there was, because it was elite, like the eye was a little trophy of like the winner.
Nice.
This is so sad to admit, but like the trophy was like concave, right? Had the hourglass shape.
Oh, right. Yeah. Because that's the trophy. It's a trophy body you're going for.
Yes, the trophy body. I mean, it is beyond bad. And so I say all that to say, for any listener who is any type of helping professional who really feels like they're the worst person in the world and all this guilt, you're not alone. I too was the worst person in the world.
Yeah.
I drank the Kool-Aid. I drank the green juice.
Yeah.
By the bucket. And it is okay to change and learn and grow. You too one day can have a weight-inclusive counseling practice, podcast, books, whatever you want. You can change.
Yeah. And acknowledging without shame where you've been or where you are maybe still, I think is really, really crucial to making that change. That sort of radical acceptance idea where you're like, okay, I don't love this. Maybe it's super problematic and there's, a lot of stuff wrong with it, but this is where I'm at. I'm a human. I make mistakes. I can do better in the future. That's crucial.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and even just to add to that, even, just even questioning is good. Questioning, being curious, meaning I don't have all the answers. I don't fully understand how this is problematic, but I have enough evidence to know that it is, or enough people are talking about that it is. So I'm open to learning more. I think there's that, am I like defending myself to the nth degree? Not open. Or am I scared and fearful because nobody wants to make mistakes and we want to be a helper? I remember that was one of my big things. Like,
of course.
How do I refund everybody's money? I was not the helper I wanted to be.
Yeah, that's such a devastating, like in healthcare, the need, the drive for perfection and always, doing everything perfectly is so strong because you feel like other people's well-being is on the line. And I mean, it is a lot of the time. And it's also true that, healthcare professionals are human and we make mistakes and sometimes we do harm and we reverse course and change our practices if need be. So I get it.
Hopefully through this podcast and many other efforts, we get a critical mass of helping professionals just making that transition. And listeners who aren't helping professionals, it helps to seek out those types of helping professionals to let them know that there is a business to be had there. And also, for your own growth and development, like considering going to these places where you are curious and concerned and being open to it and just see how you might be able to learn and grow. But major sidetrack to awesome article. We will be talking about death very soon. But anyway, the bottom line is I fell in love with it. It really was the first article that opened my eyes to this different lens of diet culture outside of women's oppression and feminism and the money involved with it, about like thinness equaling health. Literally another dynamic of just, humans don't know how to die. And it was fascinating to me. That's why it still stands. There were a few other pieces that came out after yours. I would like to think that maybe they were inspired by some of your writing and work as well. But I still think that this topic area is very, very new. Before we get into it, though, I would love it if you could just take a minute and share with the listeners more about you and your work, what you do, what you care deeply about, and then we'll circle back to this amazing piece.
I guess what I do is I am a dietitian who has a virtual private practice, meaning I see everybody online. I've always been obsessed with the internet, so it makes perfect sense that I would have gone into that as a grown-up. And I just really love counseling people to help them kind of eat what I call normally. And that word has all kinds of negative connotations to it. But what I think of is eating in a way that serves your life rather than making eating the project of your life, right? Like eating clean or eating healthy, whatever. I really strongly believe that like eating well, taking care of your body, practicing self-acceptance is a means to an end, which is living a meaningful life. And it's not something to be exchanged. Like that meaning shouldn't be exchanged with like becoming obsessed in a disordered way with food and exercise and like body policing. So I feel really strongly about helping people to utilize food and enjoy food and have it add meaning to their lives rather than take it away. And so I use Ellen Satter's eating competence model and framework. That's what I was trained in. It's the model that always appealed to me when I was going through school for nutrition. And I was really thrilled to get training from her back in 2009 to start doing it. And I've been doing that ever since then. So it's been almost 10 years. And I love giving people a sense of like autonomy around food.
That's amazing that you even had exposure to Ellen Satter and eating competence in school. Like, did your school do that for you, or did you do your own? You did your own digging, didn't you?
Yeah. I had a weird kind of trajectory into this work because instead of being somebody who was like, I'm passionate about nutrition and I want to learn the right way to eat and become a dietitian and then teach other people the right way to eat, I actually discovered health at every size first. And I was not particularly interested in nutrition in and of itself until I started dieting and then realized what a huge minefield it was as a topic. I realized while I was dieting initially as a young adult that nutrition was almost like a battlefield where the war over truth is fought, weirdly enough. Like there's all kinds of weird epistemology that happens there and arguments about how can things be known and how can we amass evidence that is actually true. And there's all kinds of contradictory and very certain sounding ideas about what is nutrition, what is the right way to eat, and what is the wrong way to eat. So I discovered that way before I ever studied nutrition, just by Googling things and trying to sort out my own eating. And I happened to come upon a book while I was struggling with dieting that introduced the concept of health at every size and introduced intuitive eating and Ellen Satter and her eating competence model. And I actually picked up the book as an angry, very defensive dieter who was convinced that this was going to be something really stupid. But just the cover of the book made me angry. And I knew that anger and defensiveness was important. And I was like, I need to read this because I need to know what is behind my reaction to this.
Wow.
And what was behind it was the fact that I was dieting and I wasn't feeling good about myself and I wasn't feeling better. I was very sick and very unhappy with my body image, even though I had lost weight. And I was starting to suspect that it was a scam, but it was the only scam I knew because it was the only one our culture ever presented as the pathway to health and happiness. So I picked up this book from a bargain bin. It's called Losing It, America's Obsession with Diet Culture and the Industry That Feeds on It, or something like that, by Laura Fraser.
Wow.
It was published in like 1997. So it's an oldie now. And I picked it up in like the year 2000. So
wow.
I brought it home, I read it, and I was like, this explains why I'm miserable. And it was basically then, and around that same time, I started to Google and see all of the contradictory messages about nutrition and diet. It was then that I decided I want to know about this and I want to go to school and study dietetics and figure out like, what the hell is this all about? Because it was so confusing.
Yeah.
So I came into dietetics already knowing kind of what my path was going to be or what I thought it was going to be. And it turned out that was what it ended up being.
So let me ask you, did you hate your training because it was all weight normative and calorie counting BS? Like, how did you get through that?
It's so weird because I didn't. I actually really loved school. I loved my clinical nutrition courses, especially. I mean, I didn't love chemistry, but who does?
Actually, I have a chemistry degree. Woo,
do you? Okay, so people with chemistry degrees probably really appreciate. I appreciate chemistry, but the practice of it is, oh my god, wow,
stoichiometry and biochem. I know.
The closer it got to biology and biological applications, the more I appreciated it and the more I enjoyed it. I loved biochemistry actually, but
could you diagram the Krebs cycle if asked right now?
No, absolutely not. No. And I remember, oh my God, just going through like memorizing the stages of glycolysis and all the enzymes involved and like before my internship interview and being like, I have to remember this, and it was just, it's really useful to know those underpinnings. But I actually think I would have benefited more from the chemistry if our training had been reversed in order. If we did the nutrition and clinical nutrition stuff first, weirdly enough, and then traced back to like the origins. I'm like, okay, here's what's going on a molecular level. Here's what's going on like a subatomic level.
Right.
But whatever, that's a whole thing. I did not hate my training. I think I had a really maybe like delusional and bizarre ability to filter all of the nutrition information I was hearing in class through kind of like a health at every size framework. Because I would ask myself if weight came up as like a factor, as a risk factor, as something that was presumed to be controllable and fixable. I asked myself, how could I achieve these same like clinical outcomes without focusing on weight? So it became a useful exercise for me. Like, how do you address?
So interesting. I wish that was me. I mean, I loved my courses. I aced them because I was straight up diet mind. I'm like, I'm going to help people. This is so fun. But that is really interesting, right? You've got this like a weight stigma button, right? Or some sort of force shield. It's like you could tell if stigma was presented and just be like, okay, I get that. That's a dominant paradigm, but how could I take what is truly science about it? Because that is what I think is the most frustrating. I mean, absolutely. There's so much about our training that we do need to learn about science and biology and how things work. It's just that weight stigma is so connected to the medical model and, you know, patriarchy and all that stuff, right? That it really is going to need an inside out transformation. So it's actually the medicine and dietitians and nurses and all the fields of helping professions who have people like you, right? That critical mass who can get introspective and, you know, challenge the paradigm and things like that. But that's, you know, it's good that you had those abilities. I bet if there's future dietitians who are listening and who are in courses now will probably benefit from hearing that. I've heard of others who have you know, struggled through having those conversations and how to work on self-care. And also, I think that there is a level of the way in which we make it hard for dietetic students who represent marginalized populations. So whether that's, you know, gender, sexual orientation, race, and for dietetics, size, I would throw into there as well. You know, like we don't exactly make it a friendly space to be a dietetic student and not be a thin blonde white lady. Right. Exactly.
With money. And I have to like the money and class thing was constantly coming up in my training because it was just kind of assumed in the ways that we were expected to work and the ways we were expected to go on and do unpaid training. It was assumed that you had either a family in your life who were sponsoring you or a man, like frankly, straight up, like a dude earning money on the side. And like, that was not true for me. I was a mature student. I was married, but my husband never made that much money. And it was a struggle. Like financially, it was a huge struggle for me to get through my training, but I felt like my perspective was important and I needed to be there. And I know lots of other students are struggling with feeling like they belong or feeling like they have the resources to get through it. And that's why dietetics ends up being such a like a quite homogenous population. So
and it's definitely something that we need to keep working on. You know, I had a podcast interview with Tamara Melton, and she is co-founder of an organization called Diversify Dietetics, and they're a U.S.-based nonprofit where they're trying to get people interested in the field and then graduate them through internships, through mentorship and collaboration and community. Because we have to be aware. You can't make any changes without the awareness, but then you have to turn awareness into action. What you've got to do is, I mean, yes, you can teach cultural competence and all this competence, but in the end, you have to actually make the people who are helping professionals represent the diversity of the people who we serve.
They're serving. Exactly. Exactly. And I was really lucky in one sense. I went to Ryerson University in downtown Toronto, and Toronto is a super, super culturally and racially diverse city. And so there was a lot of, in a sense, diversity represented in my program, but I heard from my fellow students who were like, you know, like one of my fellow students was from Bangladesh, and she told me, you know, I came back to the campus for some reason later on, and she happened to see me, and we like got together and had a little chat, and she was like, you know, Michelle, I'm working as a diet technician right now, because she was finishing up her training and was working as a diet tech, and she's like, I'm at a doctor's office that is mostly like South Asian clients, and the doctors are desperate to have a dietitian who understands this population, who eats the same food, who knows like what the cultural foodways are.
Yep.
And she was like swamped and overworked because she was the only like Bangladeshi, dietitian
Yeah.
or diet technician who was available. And so it was like the need is there. But the way that our profession is formed and trained and created, it doesn't provide for that need.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely been on my mind. And I've seen the Diversified Dietetics website. I think it's great.
Yeah. Yes. I'm wishing them the best. So I don't know I didn't hear you mention it, but I know you as the Fat Nutritionist. So is that that's like a brand, like you're out there, like this is
my thing. Yeah.
And I remember when I guess I actually told a fib because I didn't first know of you by finding that article. I just was reminded about you because I would say, I'm sure we were, in the sort of sphere around similar times. Although if you were coming around 2000, mine was probably more 2005 to 2007 window of making the transition, the early transition stages. But I know I found your website and I was like, and I remember thinking it was awesome. And then I also remember just seeing the word fat, right? It's early on. I was like, what is she doing? So I'd love to just talk for a few about how you identify and how you came to embrace the word fat. And just if you have advice for any listeners, helping professional or person just working on body acceptance. And then we're going to go to death.
Sure. So yeah, I forget, sometimes I forget that's been the calling card and what people know me for is for writing my blog called The Fat Nutritionist. And that's what I call my practice too. I basically, after I dieted and lost some amount of weight, realized I was miserable and changed course and was like, this is not for me, and decided to study nutrition. I, of course, regained lots of weight after that experience and was solidly identifiable as a fat person for the first time in my life. By myself personally, but also by, people socially. Whereas before I might have had some body image troubles and thought of myself as fat in a disparaging way. But really, I shopped in straight side stores and had all the like thin privileges that people have when they're weight normative or average size in our culture. So I basically became a fat person, both physically and politically in that transition away from dieting. And after reading I read that first book that introduced the idea of health at every size. And then I found, Fatso by Marilyn Wan. And I found lots of books that I honestly don't even remember the names of all of them now. But I looked up every book that had anything to do with fatness or, fat and feminism in the library in Toronto.
Lessons from the Fatosphere.
I remember. Yes. That came out around the time that I was starting my blog. And I read Kate Harding's blog when it came out, when it started. I was previously involved on a website called Big Fat Blog that had been around since the early 2000s, maybe 2000. And I had maintained a personal blog for some time. And I was studying nutrition this entire time, and nobody in the fat acceptance community was really explicitly talking about nutrition. And there weren't any dietitians. I knew there were dietitians involved in like the health at every size stuff, right? Yeah. Early on, like Ellen Satter would have been somebody who was kind of, para to, or just outside of, but in step with that philosophy.
Right.
And there were other dietitians early on as well, but I wasn't seeing a lot of web presence. I wasn't seeing a lot of blogs or, social media, which at the time was in its infancy still. And I decided okay, I want to move away from doing personal blogging and start doing more of like my professional blogging. Like I'm paying all this money, taking all these stupid chemistry courses. Like I may as well talk about this thing that I'm actually becoming sort of an expert in and know about. And I was also working nutrition jobs at the time. I was a diet tech for quite a while, and I sort of rotated around to all these different clinical areas and got to see so much. And I was so fortunate to do that. So I decided I had to register a domain name, and I was like, what am I going to call this thing? I don't know. And I was like, well, Fat Nutritionist, because that's what I am. I'm fat. I'm going to talk about fat acceptance stuff. I'm a nutritionist. And I felt like at the time I wasn't yet a dietitian. So in Ontario, nutritionist is the generic term you use when you're not a dietitian. But it was also a term that I knew people understood better. Like the word dietitian, people are like, what is that even? What do you do?
What is that?
Write
How
down
do you
diet?
spell it?
Yeah. They don't know how to spell it. It sounds like old fashioned and musty. It sounds like straight out of the 1920s. Honestly, it's like hospital food. It's
your hairnet.
Yeah, hairnet or like little white caps, home economics, like associations that are like old school. So I was like, this is a better term anyway.
Yeah.
It's what I'm allowed to call myself and it makes sense.
Yep.
So that's how the name came to be. I also knew it was shocking. Like people talk about, if somebody ever uses the phrase fat nutritionist in like everyday speaking, it's a disparaging term. They're talking about somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about, who is an affront to what they supposedly stand for, which is controlling your body at all costs through food and exercise. And I thought that was funny. Like, I think that's hilarious because I know about fat stigma and I know that like the fat does not prevent facts and information about chemistry coming into my brain and understandings of how to have a good relationship with food. Like I can totally do that despite my weight or, regardless of how much I weigh.
Yeah.
So I thought it was really nice to challenge that whole idea and just turn it on its head and be like, yeah, I'm fat. And the truth is people come to me because I'm fat and openly fat.
Yeah.
I think a lot of healthcare professionals believe if you talk about this stuff, you're going to drive people away because everyone wants weight loss. And in a sense, I can see where they're coming from because a lot of people do want weight loss because like I said before, it's the only scam any of us know. But I think what people want more than weight loss is to not be judged for their weight and to not be lectured about their weight. And if you call yourself openly fat or talk about fat stuff on your website, people feel safe with you. The people who don't want weight loss at all costs but don't know what else to do, they'll come to you because they know you're not going to give them a big lecture and shake your finger at them and tell them what a horrible person they are. And so I get clients because I call myself a fat nutritionist. So that's just the bottom line.
Yeah. No, I think that's so awesome. It was helpful to me way back then. And I can see even to this day, it's helpful to clients. It's helpful, it's visibility matters, right? It's a form of visibility. And, as we were highlighting earlier, there's so much more that we can, should, and need to do. Okay. So let's shift to the topic du jour then, and talk more about this connection between diet culture and the fear of death. So I would just love to know, like, what inspired you to write this article and just kind of give listeners a highlight to like the theme of it,
Okay.
and what inspired you?
Sure. This goes back a long time. This goes back to when I was a teenager and I was observing like how people around me talked about health, how people around me talked about mortality and death. And I sat down one day with my mom and a group of friends and one of my mom's friends. And we were having a discussion about how my mom's friend's husband had passed away recently, like in the last couple of years. And when this friend went to the doctor because she was sad, I think, and she was having trouble dealing with her grief, the doctor was a athletic, thin, young woman. And when my mom's friend said, my husband passed away, the doctor immediately was like, well, how much did he weigh? And did he smoke? Wow. Did he do bad things, essentially? And she said, well, yeah, he was a smoker and he was a big guy. He was, quite heavy. And the doctor replied and said, well, no wonder he died. This is obviously, what are you upset about? Essentially, of course he was going to die. And she was heartbroken, understandably, because, when people die, it's extraordinarily sad.
Right.
But in that moment, in that conversation, something clicked for me. And I remember saying it in the group we were sitting having this conversation in. And I looked at my mom's friend and I said, I think that doctor was terrified of death. I think that's why she said that to you. And you didn't deserve to hear it because it's wrong. It's sad when anybody dies, but the idea that you can blame somebody for their own death, for their mortality, which is, an indispensable part of the human condition,
right?
Regardless of how much you weigh, whether you smoke, how you eat, or whatever, the idea you could blame somebody for that, I saw immediately through it as like a defense mechanism. So I had carried this idea with me for years and into my, study of nutrition and whatnot. And I can't remember what year this was, but I wrote a blog post about this incident, probably in 2008 or something. Probably a bit later than that, maybe 2010 or 11. And I knew Ernest Becker because I had done some Googling and searching and whatnot to be like, are there books about this? Because this has to be a thing. Like somebody has to have studied this weird defense mechanism against death. And I discovered Ernest Becker. But for some reason, I didn't buy his books right away. I probably couldn't afford it or something. I don't know. But I was reading a Wikipedia article and going on Google Books and trying to read every excerpt I could. And I knew that there was something here. So I was busy and I was running my practice and seeing my clients. And finally in 2016, I was like, I'm going to sit down and study this and actually just understand, like, what is this mechanism? What is going on? So I studied Ernest Becker, who wrote The Denial of Death, which came out in the late 60s, early 70s. And then his follow-up book, which was published posthumously. He actually was dying while he wrote these books and didn't know it part of the time. But his follow-up book was called Escape from Evil. So I studied these pretty in-depthly through 2016 as the American campaign, presidential campaign was going on in the background. And it was a really surreal time to be reading about all this. And I read about the terror management theory that sprung from Ernest Becker's philosophy. And so that was carried on by social scientists like Sheldon Solomon and some people whose names I can't pronounce, to be honest with you. But three very cool social scientists took Ernest Becker's ideas and boiled them down into actual experiments that could be done and to see if they could validate the theory. And they did. It's one of the few areas, I think, in social psychology that has overcome like this replication crisis, where they've replicated these experiments successfully. They've done them on all kinds of different behaviors. And they find that when people are primed with thoughts about mortality, they behave differently. And they act in ways that either they can be harsh to other people, they can scapegoat other groups of people, they can cling more closely to their own cultural traditions or religious beliefs or symbolic objects that are important to those beliefs. And it seemed to me while I was reading about all of this research and reading Ernest Becker's writings that diet culture could very clearly be connected to this kind of behavior. So that's how it came about.
And then how'd you get it in the Atlantic? Pitching, or just random luck?
No, I wrote a thread on Twitter because I was like, you guys, I've been reading this stuff. I'm just going to like vomit it out on Twitter because that's what I do. And an editor from the Atlantic contacted me and said, like, would you write this into an article and let us publish it in the health section or whatever? And I was really excited and thrilled because some people that I love, whose work I love, like Alan Levinovitz, I don't know if you're reading, he wrote The Gluten Lie, and he's been writing all these brilliant articles about connecting like sort of like religious mindsets to diet culture and nutrition beliefs. He was a huge help to me in my internship, in my final project, which was connecting like religious thinking and symbolic thinking to diet culture. So shout out to Alan. He's awesome. But I had seen his articles. He'd had at least one in the Atlantic and he'd had some in Wired and elsewhere. And I was just like, this guy's amazing. And I was thrilled to be asked to write something along those similar lines in the Atlantic. So of course I said yes. And I just collected all my notes up and wrote it.
Yeah, it's really awesome. It's an amazing article. I think that how you were able to provide, to make those connections and then, provide associations between like what we see now and frankly is normalized, but, things like clean eating, and how that is, it's upheld as this is the normal thing to do. This is the good thing to do. And so, I mean, and just sort of like unpacking it, it's like, okay, like on the one hand, like it's good to want to, like humans have evolved. We must, we have that fight or flight, right? That we don't have to use our prefrontal cortex when we're crossing a street and a car is coming. We just react, right? So it is good that we have the awareness to want to be here and live, and that in ways can be a motivation for, I don't know, having a good life and going to school or having a job, and understanding our mortality can be a motivator to want to make the best of the time that we have, right?
Yeah, the desire to survive is an understandable and, not a changeable part of being a human and a living thing. Yes.
Right. So it's not, it's like we want that, but it crosses a line when the fear, I guess, kind of overrides acceptance of mortality and even like embracing and accepting mortality is not
saying, I can't wait to die, right? I think
there's a difference. Yeah. So we're a very black and white thinking culture. And this comes up in dieting all the time, but in everything, in politics and whatnot, that either it's one thing or it's the other. It's very binary. But the truth is, acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean that you don't do things for your well-being. And that's true with fat acceptance. It's also true with death acceptance. Just because I know that I'm mortal and I can somewhat face that reality that I'm not going to live forever, it does not mean that I try to die, that I try to hasten my death by whatever, unhealthy behaviors or whatnot. But it does mean that I acknowledge the scarcity of life and try to make it as meaningful as possible and try to enjoy myself while doing prudent things that could possibly help protect me in the future. But doing prudent things to help protect me in the future is not the same thing as immortality.
Right.
And that's where things get a little fuzzy for people.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that transcends to this, there's this kind of belief, right? Well, it's good. It's good if you care about your health. And I feel like I align with that, right? But then it goes to, well, but if you're not healthy, right. through your entire life, then there's something wrong with you, right? Like if you're not healthy, like to the binary, if you're not healthy, you're dying. And oh, by the way, you caused this.
And it's your fault. Yes. So the part that really stuck out to me, or the part that I really latched onto of studying all of this stuff, was the idea of blame and blamelessness that people seem really obsessed with. So maybe some people can accept, like, yeah, people get sick and die sometimes, but it's always their fault. Like when they do, it's because they were bad people or they were irresponsible. And it's like, dude, no, like everybody's going to get sick. Everybody's going to die in some way or another. And blamelessness should not be part of this equation, because I believe that's unethical and it's unkind. So that was one of my issues. The other issue is that people seem to not just build legacies in order to strive for immortality, whether that legacy is like, oh, I have chiseled abs, or I wrote a book, or, I amassed a great wealth. People also try to construct hierarchies that seem to insulate them from the fear of death. So a hierarchy means that somebody has to be underneath getting crushed or being considered less than human in order for somebody else to transcend that and feel heroic and superhuman. That bothers me because it wastes people's precious, scarce lives.
I'm going down the lines. I'm tracking that down the lines of social comparison theory. So where we naturally compare like up or down. And so we can get in trouble with that when we like compare up. So say it's like comparing bodies and this person has a better this or that. And that it's, social comparison is supposed to function as a way to help motivate your own self-awareness, but it can also backfire, right? Because in something like body comparisons, and then you're never enough, right? The trouble that can result from all of that. Yeah. But then also that there's a tendency to compare down, which is like, I need to feel, in order for me to feel good enough at this spot, I need to look at somebody or something that's worse than me and maintain my place of power, or else I don't know how to process it.
Yeah. And that goes back to Ernest Becker's original writings. He uses the term self-esteem, and he basically proposes it as the basic mechanism that protects us from the fear of mortality. If we can puff ourselves up, if we can feel more significant, especially, and more significant than other people, other mortal people, then that has a protective effect. It also has a very destructive effect on a social level and sometimes on a personal level.
Yeah. Well, and part of that destructive effect is how we take these things happening and then take a look at how it informs the belief system that of weight, right? So whether it's higher weight causing death, right? I mean, the O words, obesity, being a word, like, doesn't it mean like eating yourself to fatness or death or something? Yeah. So even the root of the name of the meaning, and then, morbid next to the word obesity. So that is problematic in and of itself, and then embraced in the whole medical community. But it's this idea of that the higher weight is causing a disease or death, that then it doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's just, it becomes the reason to uphold diet culture, the reason to uphold,
so it's kind of like we're clinging to it because we can't process our fear of death. So there has to be this purpose of using weight stigma and upholding diet culture as the thing that helps us avoid the worst thing that we could be, which is fat. In some minds.
And dead.
Yeah, fat and dead.
So you have very cleanly summarized what I believe to be a function behind weight stigma and fat stigma. So Ernest Becker, again, sorry, I will refer to him obsessively. Because
we love him. I wish he was still here with us. We'd have him on.
I know. But he referred to the tendency in Escape from Evil, which was the book after the denial of death. He referred to the tendency to fetishize evil. And so in human minds, evil is anything that could cause your death. And when he says fetishize, he means to attach it to an object that can be controlled and understood and defeated potentially. So I see obesity as a construct and as an image that is presented in the media as this thing that we fight with warlike terminology. It is a fetishized death object. It is symbolic of our fear of death as a culture. And we fight it because we want to overcome death and we want to transcend our mortality as human beings. And so the problem is, of course, fat people are real people in the world. They're not just fetish objects to symbolize evil for other people to feel significant and transcendent. And they get hurt by this because our bodies are literally like the target of all of this fear of mortality that is just a part of being human. But it gets localized to our bodies, and then our bodies become the enemy, and it can excuse violence that is done to those bodies.
Right. And all different types of violence, whether that is aggressive action. I remember in Reading in Hunger where Roxane Gay talked about strangers taking food out of her shopping cart.
Right.
Virgie Tovar was on a recent podcast, and she told me about how a total stranger came up to her while she was like enjoying her morning coffee and like at a beachy town. I think she was in California, but and she's like, make sure you don't eat pork. And she's just like, don't talk to me while I'm drinking my morning coffee, which I thought was an awesome response.
Yes.
And I think that that's part of what keeps the oppression going, is that we normalize these behaviors, and then that people who are at higher weights, if they don't have the tools to say this is wrong and protect themselves against it, they can internalize a stigma, which scientifically we've seen studies show that it is associated with healthcare stress and healthcare avoidance.
Yeah, it harms people.
Yeah. And even when we look at all of, all the social ways we end up harming people by embracing, your higher weight is going to cause a disease that you should be blamed for, and then it's going to cause an early death. All the different ways we uphold it, there's also this part of it where it's like all of that. Then we look at what is actually scientifically true, which medicine is getting better. And what we need to do is have great medicine that goes across socioeconomic status. So if we improved healthcare access, we actually would improve people's lives. If we reduce weight stigma, we would improve people's lives. There's lots of problems to solve. I mean, even food supply issues we can solve, but not in the frame of personal blame and shame.
Yeah.
But what is so fascinating, I'm sure you've seen it too, not a lot of people read research studies, but when they come out and you look at them, actually, people are living longer and dying at older ages, and the ones who live are actually fat people. And so losing weight is a higher risk for mortality, whereas having more body fat is actually associated with a reduced risk. And context-wise, I'm just speaking off the top of my head, I do believe that at the highest ends of obesity that the correlation dies down, but certainly in the overweight category, and I believe like the obesity grade 1, according to BMI, is associated with longevity. And so it's like, but again, I guess in all this social belief systems, the truth doesn't matter.
No. No, in fact, the truth is threatening. I think the idea is that we have to live in an illusion to protect ourselves from the fear that we all live with of mortality, the deep existential crisis of being a human being. Truth is frightening because it points to us being insignificant. It points to life being uncertain and weird, biology being complex and sometimes inscrutable, and nutrition being kind of an in some ways an unsolvable puzzle. There are literally questions about nutrition that may never be answerable with study designs, because some studies would have to be designed that are either impossible or unethical to conduct to answer all of the pressing questions people have about nutrition. Those truths are terrifying. People are not interested in them. It's much better to fill the vacuum of uncertainty with things that are known but are untrue.
Right.
And I think that explains a lot about what goes on with nutrition and what goes on with body size in our culture.
Yeah. I have to transition us, at least for a few minutes, into how this all relates to the queen of wellness, I guess, Gwyneth Paltrow and Goop. And the thing, like, I've never signed up for the newsletter. I've always been like, what is this? And then it's like, Goop doesn't die. It will not, speaking of death, that won't go away. And there was the New York Times magazine piece. It was brilliantly written. And of course, Goop is sharing it left and right because it's, no such thing as bad press, right? Because the summary at the end was, this stuff is really ridiculous, but it's also a huge moneymaker. And so, I guess I would love to maybe kind of pick your brain a little bit about, hopefully this earlier conversation will lead listeners to understand. And this is why places like Goop exist and why they're so popular and successful. But also, I feel like one of the things about Goop is like, you see something like, okay, like the vaginal steaming or jade egg, like all that crap, right? See, you laugh. Like we can look at that and be like, oh, that's so ridiculous. It's absurd. But then it's kind of, I think what we do is we make the mistake of like, that's so far out there. That's not me or not for me. But the reality of it is they include clean recipes and lots of products that might hook you in anyway. And so, I guess that's this fear of like, hey, it's great if Goop's not for you and just ignore all that stuff, right? But you're going to find somebody, at least to help you better understand why diet culture is so profitable, but also somebody will be into it. And so, what do we do? Do we just sit down and take it, or what are your thoughts?
Oh gosh. It's such a huge question, but it kind of reminds me of like Sky Mall magazine, or what's that other like wacky catalog that sells things that you're like, nobody would ever buy this, like crazy, like mini golf courses you can put in your office for $5 million and things like that. The things you read on an airplane that you're just like, this is for like bored rich people. I don't know what's going on, but those companies make money. Like they stay in business for a reason. And even though we can look at their catalogs and their products and laugh at them and think it's totally absurd, there is somebody somewhere in some executive office who is like, I want the the magical crystal stick that will turn upside down and lead me to water or something. Somebody's buying the stuff. I think the idea is for Goop, like my guess is that it's very aspirational to people. And like, I think Gwyneth Paltrow has even said in the press that like, these are not meant to necessarily be accessible things to the average person. They're meant to present an aspirational image that people, maybe they want for their future, or they almost want it to be expensive because then that makes it seem more rarefied and important. It adds a symbolic, value to it.
Well, this is interesting because I remember her being quoted in that article as aspirational, and you've seen her mentioned in other places. But the reality of it is she's presenting aspirational as if there's no harm being done.
Right.
Right. But because, aspirational, that sounds great. Aren't we? We're born, we're supposed to succeed and achieve. But that's what makes us good people. Right. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I think if we blended into what we're talking about is we're saying that there is harm being done, because if you can never quite get there, there's this perfectionism thread of nothing is ever good enough, right? The daily shame that might be going on in your mind, that inner critic voice that just is like, we know in counseling, right, that those harsh self-criticisms actually get in the way of you taking steps toward truly helpful, positive self-care things because nothing's good enough. Yeah, and it
can definitely be destructive.
Yeah,
because like you said with the social comparison theory, like if people are looking at that and comparing themselves, and it's actually causing them to freeze in place and not do anything because nothing is good enough. Or if it leads them down a garden path of something that's not actually effective and uses up resources that could be better spent on, like, I don't know, like some vegetables. Like, you could go buy some vegetables at your local grocery store and not buy jade eggs or whatever Gwyneth Paltrow is selling. And you would probably have a measurably more significant impact on your health and well-being and quality of life in that moment. But like, people, they're not going to want to do that. They're going to be diverted to things that are really symbolic in nature, but are being presented as scientifically rigorous, and it presented as things that will have a measurable effect on your actual health when it's not true. And that's actually what disturbs me the most about wellness culture in general and diet culture, is that people are presenting what are really like symbolic plans and symbolic meaning systems, but they're lying about what they are, and people are engaging in them and practicing them and lying to themselves about what they're doing. Like, I think symbolism is really important, and humans have this amazing ability to think in abstract terms and in symbolic terms. And that's great. And we build entire cultures and foodways and, food traditions out of that symbolic thinking. The problem is diet culture takes that symbolism and calls it science. And Gwyneth Paltrow takes it and calls it science, and then sells it to people who think they're having a, like a biological impact on their life, when really it's purely symbolic. So to me, the lie is what bothers me on like a deeply moral level. But of course, the suffering that it engenders and the suffering it causes for people who, then can't actually do the things that would make their lives better is clearly problematic.
Yeah.
And I honestly don't know what to do about that. We live in a cultural moment where like truth is up in the air as like, does it exist? I don't know. We're living in like a deeply postmodern cultural moment.
The Twilight Zone.
Yeah, it's bizarre. And like stuff that a lot of people would laugh at, especially people with scientific training of any kind. You'll see stuff like the Flat Earth Society and laugh. But like, there are people who buy this, who believe this, who are deeply affected by it, and who waste years of their lives in pursuit of something that we know is nonsense. But they're seeking something else, and they're getting something from it. I just don't understand exactly what, other than suppression of fear of mortality.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's like sort of to help people through the thought process of things is that, yes, that we acknowledge that the dominant culture is a body, weight, beauty, obsessed culture. That's where the power is. And by rejecting it and not buying into it, you are, like aligning with a surrender of power in so many ways, right? So to say, of course, it makes sense how things have been normalized and how you've been conditioned your entire life. I mean, we've been conditioned to believe that thinness equals health. And going back to people die, I mean, people die, healthy people die, right? They're that the quote picture of health, whether it's the surprise marathoner who gets stomach cancer and is young and has, 2 young kids and sadly passes away, or Bernie, who comes on the podcast with me, recently lost a friend of his who was a trainer who was biking and got hit by a truck, and she had kids. Yeah. And so it's like, it's this, how all those things connect is that it is not, death is not something you can control. But I think we do lie to people, and that they can, and we use medicine and stats.
Even medicine does sometimes.
Yeah. Well, to make us think that we have more control than we actually do. And the author of the New York Times Magazine Goop article, which I'll share that link to in the show notes as well. I might mess up her name, but her name's Taffy Brodesser-Akner.
Yes.
And she also acknowledged in this Twitter thread, it didn't really make it in the issue, but acknowledged in this Twitter thread and validating that a key reason why a lot of women are driven to wellness is because they are not heard in medicine. They're not believed in medicine, and they don't want to feel pain, and they want to feel better. They want to relieve themselves, and they're not able to find help elsewhere. And I thought that was a really powerful thread and point to make, that I don't think either one of us in this conversation want to apply personal shame or blame to
anybody listening for anything they've done in the past or anything that they're doing now. I know in my philosophy and how I work with clients and in writing and body kindness, I explicitly said, because of course I was going to give a bunch of this is non-diet healthy stuff that you could do, which some people might still see those things as diety. But in the beginning, I say nobody can tell you what body kindness is or isn't.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And in that article that was in Vice, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember who wrote it, whatever. It was about Jen Gunter attending like this Goop wellness seminar or whatever. The author of that article interviewed Sheldon Solomon, who is one of the lead researchers on terror management theory. And he said that the problem with the fear of death is when we sort of repress it with all of these sort of dysfunctional behaviors. And that the sweet spot that he advocates for is like awareness of our fear of death and grappling with it in an honest and open way. And I think that's what people can really do when they truly face down like a health issue. You know, people who are facing mortality because they have a real serious health issue, sometimes they get diverted off into fantasy, but a lot of the times they grapple with it in a very honest and courageous and realistic, practical way, even though it can be hard in the face of diet culture telling them that green juices will cure their cancer or whatever. And I think like those are the people who inspire me, like, and that radical acceptance of the situation of what your body is doing, what your body looks like, the human condition, which is that we are mortal. All of that requires a kind of like acknowledgement and still action in the moment. It's not lying down and being like, well, I'm mortal anyway. You know, I'm fat anyway. I may as well just lay here in a pile and die. Yeah. No, it means acknowledging and accepting that life is scarce, life is frightening and uncertain, and you can still do things in the moment right now to care for yourself, to accept yourself, and to be of service to other people who are going through the exact same existential crisis that you are. So I guess maybe that's what I think people can do. I don't know if our culture will latch onto that as a larger push and larger movement. I don't know, but lots of things are changing. So I guess it's possible. But if I can at least do that a little tiny piece of it in my own life with myself personally, with my clients, with anybody I talk to, with anything I write, if I can encourage people to live right now and to take care of themselves, yes, but to take care of themselves in the service of living a meaningful life, then that's the best I can do.
Yeah. And I think that is the thing to do, you know, looking at where's the most immediate locus of control anyway. So, you know, in that need to have others, you know, be aligned with us and on that same page as us, right? Like I'll often get those questions up, like, well, what do I do if somebody else is still happy in their dieting ways? And that can be a complicated answer because it depends on how close are they and is this your partner? Is this somebody you care deeply about and what is really bothering you about it, et cetera. But I think go back to yourself, if you are feeling let down by diet culture, if you are not in a place where you feel you have a way of caring for yourself that is workable for you, don't worry about everybody else and do they believe that what you're doing is the right thing, at least for right now, right? Go with yourself first. Let yourself evolve and explore and be curious and
be the change.
Yes, do it. Yeah, because and then I think that because it's like you're not going to see the end at the beginning, right? It's going to look like very like trying to look through an opaque, window or something like that. But as you take steps and move, you're going to be from a different perspective. You're going to see things differently and you're better going to be able to, do what it is. First of all, finding your people, where it's kind of like, hey, maybe I don't need, everybody in the world to be non-diet in order for me to have a better life.
Oh, yeah. A lot of what our culture teaches is actively toxic, and you have to be countercultural to have any hope of a personal sense of wellness, like a true personal sense of wellness in this world. Yeah. Because a lot of the stuff we're taught from capitalism, from white supremacy, from diet culture, these things are toxic to our humanity, essentially. And so, you're going to have to go against the stream for yourself, and then you might start to churn a little bit of the current around you to shift to.
Yeah. Yep. And live a good life for yourself, because all of us, if there's one thing we know, we're all going to die.
Yeah, it's not gonna be forever. So
Right.
do it now.
Exactly. We're really, you mentioned Marilyn Wan earlier, and I want to say is something she said on her Facebook page recently, but she talked about this perspective of, I really feel like I'm renting this body, like I'm a renter here. And so like, as a way of like, just let me rent and then I'll be gone and like kind of leave me alone. And I was like, it was just this interesting perspective about, yeah, we're all just a bunch of renters, aren't we? We're not buying property. So anyway, fascinating stuff.
No, we're part of the mulch, part of the organic mulch that the crust of the planet has come together into this body, this consciousness right now. And it's going to return to mulch at some point. Exactly. As disgusting as that sounds, that's the truth. And I believe in confronting that very uncomfortable truth daily, if I can, in little ways.
Well, and it's a great way to wrap because it brings me back to the beginning when I said death positive. So, and you mentioned mulch. So I will now have to bring up Caitlin Dougherty, who is a wonderful death positive advocate. And she's part of the Order of the Good Death. It really is a thing. She's the author of 2 best-selling books, and she has a great YouTube video out recently about dying fat. So I'll share that. And I'll share her TED Talk where she opens up by saying, when I die, I want to be eaten by animals. And, and basically, well, it totally inspired me in thinking about what do I want? And there's all different types of things you can do. And yes, I'm, the chemist in me or the naturalist in me is leaning toward, I want to be with a mulch. So there we go.
And I have to say that one of the things I took away from Ernest Becker's book, The Escape from Evil, was that eating is the first magic ritual. It transfers life energy from one object to another. And Caitlin saying she wants to be eaten by animals is like, it's like a magic ritual. She's transferring what was her life energy to animals that will continue on. So in that weird way, there's a legacy. And, and I think it's wonderful, but it's an honest legacy and not one that harms anyone.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. That's a great place to end. You are coming back on again, girl, because we could talk for, I remember when I started this pre-recording, I'm like, this will be about 30 minutes and it's been an hour. I do it all the time. But before we go, definitely let people know how they can get in touch with you and find and follow you, all your good stuff.
Yeah. So my blog, The Fat Nutritionist, is just on fatnutritionist.com. And I have a Twitter account that I'm pretty active on at Twitter, at Fat Nutritionist. I also have a Facebook page. I think it's called The Fat Nutritionist. You can look me up there. So
wonderful. And I'll include all those links in the show notes.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming on today.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I have followed your stuff in the media for years and years and years, and I was like so thrilled to get to talk to you. So thank you.
Well, and now we're friends. We're going to do it again.
Awesome.
And that's a wrap on today's show. Let's continue the conversation on Facebook. Just search Body Kindness Podcast and click to join. And if you can contribute to the production costs for the 2018 podcast season, visit gofundme.com/bodykindness. We love ratings and reviews. Please do that. And don't forget to let your friends know that Body Kindness is one of your can't miss podcasts. If you have questions, comments, or guest recommendations, shoot me an email, Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com.